I thought I was done
Ah,
with
that hit the
surprises
spot.
the day my
You
divorce
needed
papers
that,
were
huh?
finalized.
Yeah,
The
long
ink
day
barely
already.
dry and my bank account already bleeding, which was exactly why the listing caught my eye. Remote cabin, mountain edge, must sell fast. Cash only because desperation recognizes desperation. And when I stood there weeks later with the keys cold in my palm, staring at a crooked wooden cabin crouched like a wounded animal beneath the pines, I believed I had won something. A cheap victory, a quiet place to disappear. But the land felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The air too still, the silence too deliberate, like the forest was holding its breath, and yet I ignored it. Because men like me always ignore warnings when they come quietly. Inside the cabin smelled of old wood, dust, and something faintly metallic. The kind of scent you only notice when it's already too late. And the realtor who refused to meet me on site, who mailed the keys without ever shaking my hand, hadn't mentioned the basement. Probably because it wasn't visible at first, hidden beneath a warped rug and a trapdoor so old it looked like part of the floor itself. And I only found it that night when the wind began to howl and something knocked from below. Not a thump like settling wood, but a deliberate sound. 3 slow knocks, patient, knowing, as if whoever or whatever was down there had waited a very long time for someone like me to arrive. I told myself it was animals, pipes, raccoons, anything reasonable. But reason fled the moment I lifted the trapdoor and felt warm air breathe against my face, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of earth and smoke and something human. And when I descended the creaking stairs with a flashlight shaking in my hand, my heart hammered so loud I was sure it would give me away. Though to what I still didn't know, until the beam landed on her sitting calmly on a stone bench, hands folded, long black hair streaked with silver, skin weathered but radiant, eyes dark and steady like they had seen centuries pass without blinking. And she didn't flinch at the light, didn't scream, didn't beg. She only smiled softly and said, "You took a long time to come home, husband." And in that moment the world split, because nothing prepares you for a stranger claiming you with certainty, older than fear. And I laughed then, a sharp hysterical sound, because the alternative was screaming. And I told her she had the wrong man, that she was trespassing, that I was calling the police. And she tilted her head with pity, not fear, and replied in a voice that echoed strangely in the stone chamber, "You always say that in the beginning." And the walls seemed to remember her words, repeating them faintly like a chorus. And panic finally clawed its way free as I backed up the stairs, slammed the trapdoor shut, shoved furniture over it like a child hiding from monsters, and spent the rest of the night with a shotgun across my lap, not sleeping, listening to the cabin breathe, to the wind whisper my name, though I swear I never told it. And when morning came I tried to leave. I truly did, but the truck wouldn't start. The phone had no signal, and the road I drove down the night before ended abruptly in dense forest where no forest had been, as if the land itself had rearranged while I slept. And every step I took away from the cabin made my chest ache until I turned back without understanding why, collapsing onto the porch, gasping like a man dragged underwater. And that was when I realized the truth creeping into my bones. Cold and undeniable, this place wasn't abandoned. It was waiting, and so was she. Days passed, or maybe hours. Time unraveled there, and every night she knocked from below. Never angry, never urgent. Always patient, always 3 slow taps. And each time she spoke my name with an intimacy that felt stolen yet familiar, telling me stories through the floorboards, stories of fires and horses and bloodlines bound by oaths older than the state itself, stories where my face wore different names but the same soul, stories where I had promised her eternity beneath the mountains and broken that promise again and again, reborn into ignorance while she remained anchored, watching generations rise and rot above her. And the scariest part wasn't that I began to believe her, it was that my dreams began to change, filling with memories that weren't mine, hands painted red with ritual clay, lips speaking Apache words I'd never learned yet understood. A wedding beneath a blood moon where I had placed a stone, ring on her finger, and sworn myself to the land, to her, forever. And when I woke from those dreams my chest ached with longing so sharp it brought tears, and I found myself sitting by the trapdoor, listening, answering her questions, asking my own, until one night I opened it again, not with fear but with need. and she looked up at me with such relief that my knees buckled, and she reached out, placing her palm against my chest through the air, never touching, and whispered, "You remember now," and I didn't say yes, I didn't say no, because somewhere, deep inside a voice identical to mine whispered she's telling the truth, and that was when I understood the final horror that the cabin wasn't cheap, the land wasn't empty, and my life wasn't my own anymore. If you're listening to this and feel that pull in your chest, that whisper telling you to stay even when you should run, then you already understand why I couldn't leave. I stopped pretending I was still a man with choices the night I opened the trapdoor, fully, and descended without a weapon, my hands empty, because something inside me insisted weapons were an insult here. And when my boots touched the stone floor, the basement no longer felt like a cellar but like a hollowed heart of the mountain itself, walls etched with symbols that pulsed faintly like embers beneath ash. And she stood to greet me, taller than I remembered, presence expanding as if the space recognized her authority, and she said my name, again, all of my names layered together in a cadence that unraveled time, and I collapsed to my knees because memory finally broke through resistance, not as neat visions, but as a flood of sensation, the weight of responsibility, the terror of loving something eternal while knowing I was not, the vow spoken not to dominate but to protect, to stand as bridge rather than master. And I understood then that I hadn't married her the way men marry women. I had bound myself as a witness, a keeper, a living promise between her people and the land, between what was taken and what still endured. And every lifetime I returned ignorant, she waited without bitterness, because patience was her strength and forgetting was my curse. She lifted my chin gently and told me the truth. I had avoided that the cabin was built over a place where the mountain listens, where stories become law, and that when the old world was broken by greed and fire, a bargain was made to keep something sacred breathing beneath the damage. And I was the one who offered himself again and again, because love frightened me less than responsibility. And the reason the realtor never came, the reason maps lied and roads shifted, was because the land recognized only one guardian at a time. And I had finally returned, before it finished closing its fist around the valley forever. I wanted to argue, to deny the unfairness of a fate I didn't consciously choose, but she answered before I spoke, saying choice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet yes whispered across lifetimes. And she showed me what would happen if I walked away now, not visions of punishment but absence, the slow suffocation of springs, the collapse of old trees, the forgetting of names until even the wind spoke only silence. And what terrified me most was how deeply that loss hurt, like watching a loved one fade. And I realized the ache in my chest wasn't fear, but recognition, because loving something doesn't require understanding, only commitment. She told me the marriage was never about possession, that I was free to leave as many times as I wanted, but the land would suffer each time, and eventually it would stop calling me back, and that final forgetting would be worse than death, because it would mean I had lived many lives and protected nothing. And the cruelty of that truth broke me more completely than chains ever could. Days or seasons passed as she taught me again how to listen to stone, how to feel water shift before it surfaced, how to remember without drowning. And the basement transformed, walls opening into passages lit by a fire that did not burn, where stories of her people were kept not as relics, but as living breath. And she was no ghost or prisoner, as I once believed, but a sentinel bound by her own vow to remain until the land no longer needed watching. And I asked her why she loved me when I failed her so often, and she smiled with a sadness that carried centuries and said love isn't measured by perfection, but by return, by the courage to come back knowing you will be asked to give again. Eventually she led me to the threshold beneath the cabin where the mountain's pulse was strongest, and there I had to choose not whether to stay married to her, but whether to remember fully, because memory would anchor me, age me differently, shorten this life even as it deepened it. And I hesitated, thinking of the world above, the noise, the ease of ignorance, the freedom to be nobody. And she did not rush me, because she never had, and in that silence, I understood the final truth. The cheap cabin was bait only for those already bound. And the reason you're hearing this now is because the land doesn't just choose guardians, it tests witnesses, people who feel the pull when the story reaches them, people who recognize the weight of remembering. I chose to remember, and the moment I did the mountain exhaled. The cabin groaned like a living thing settling into peace, and she kissed my forehead not as a wife claiming a husband, but as an equal acknowledging a partner. And when I returned, upstairs the world looked the same, but felt thinner, like a veil pulled tight over something immense, and I knew I would live quietly, protect fiercely, and eventually forget again, trusting that some future version of me would feel this pull and return once more. If this story found you and something inside stirred, don't ignore it, because stories survive by being carried. And if you want more tales like this, stories that linger, that remember what the world tries to bury, subscribe to this channel now, because every witness keeps the land breathing, and every subscriber ensures these stories are never forgotten.
Subscribe to my channel.